What's up, guys? In this video, we're going to talk about whether or not you should put your spouse on your limited liability company. All right, let's get started. So here's the issue that comes up a lot. Let's say that you have a business, a limited liability company, and it's running a traditional business, or you're investing in real estate and you're setting up the LLCs like we talk about on this channel to protect your assets. Well, invariably, in many instances, only one spouse may be involved in that particular activity. And so this question comes up, well, if my spouse is not involved in my company or the business that I'm running or the investing LLC, should I put my spouse on my company? Well, the answer to that is kind of complicated, and it really comes down to, as I would say, two things. Number one, what type of business are you conducting? All right, so is it something where it requires that the manager or the members of that LLC be available quite often to sign on agreements? That is, you're working with third parties and they always require that every member or every manager is present to sign on an agreement. If you've got a business like that where you know that everyone's going to have to always sign on behalf of that company if you're doing business, well, that may make it impractical, especially if one of your spouses is not always available to sign. And so this can hold up the business itself. And so in that particular case, I'd advise against bringing a spouse on. Now, if you're involved in a business that doesn't necessarily require that, so what examples would I be referring to here? If you're in flipping property, should you put your spouse on the LLC that holds the property? Probably not if that spouse isn't involved in the flipping, because you're going to be selling, you're going to be buying property, and they may require that all the people involved in that company be available to sign. Whereas if you have a LLC that's set up for rental real estate, well, in that case, you're not going to run into these issues very, very often. So I would advise that you put your spouse on that LLC. Now, if you're wondering, why am I telling you to put your spouse on the limited liability company? Because here's what could happen. You're out there, you're working on your property, or maybe you're just driving home one day, you're struck by another car, you fall off the roof of the property, and now you're incapacitated. You're in the hospital, you're in a coma. Who's going to step in and be able to manage that company? Well, if your spouse isn't listed on that LLC as a member or as a manager or in the structure somewhere, then that's going to impair their ability to take over control and actually handle the day-to-day operations of that business. So if you don't have somebody else there, then you're going to actually put yourself in a position where it's going to create problems. You're going to have to, spouse may have to go to court and get herself or himself appointed as a manager or member of that limited liability company if you're incapacitated. Now, the worst case scenario, then I've seen this happen time and time again with individuals, is they don't have their spouse on the business, and then the business owner that's running the business, that's involved in the day-to-day, they die. Now their spouse is forced to go through the probate process and go through all these extra attorney's fees and layers in order to take over control of that business and continue to run that business. So my recommendation would be, if it's not a business that's going to require a lot of spousal interaction because of the agreements, then definitely put them on. Now, let's assume in the first case scenario where I said, hey, let's say that you have to have a lot of spousal interactions with signing on behalf of documents, and your other spouse isn't interested, or they're not going to be easily available to sign on these docs. What is a workaround then? Well, the bare minimum, what I would suggest you do is bring the spouse on to the bank account. List them as an officer or something like that. They're not necessarily a member, or they're not going to be a manager in the company, but they're an officer in that company. Put them on the bank account so at least they would have access to the funds. The worst thing you could do is put your spouse in a position where they need to write checks to pay the bills because you're not there, and your business starts to fail because people aren't getting paid, so people quit working for your business. But if you have your spouse on as a signer onto the account, the spouse can take care of all that. So it can be kind of complicated. If you got questions about it, check out the notes below this video. I've got a link there. You can set up a free strategy session with us. We can talk to you about your company, how to structure it to make sure you can put your spouse on there, and some of the other things you may want to do to fine-tune your business. Take care.